with their quarterback. They take Michael Penix, that number 8 overall pick. And as it appears right now, Michael Penix, he is their first-round draft pick, the quarterback of the future. They paid Kirk Cousins a lot of money to be their quarterback of now. And now we're going to look at the stud quarterbacks of the past. Of course, our colleague Matt Ryan just recently announced his retirement from the NFL, taking Atlanta to a Super Bowl in 2017. Michael Vick, and the best for last, baby, Danny Kanell joining the Mount Rushmore of quarterbacks there.
Oh, wow. Okay.
For the Atlanta Falcons. Yes, I said it. Dramatic zoom in on DK, and here he is now. So what questions do we have for the NFC South? Of course, starting with Atlanta, we have DK and Robert Turbin joining us here on HQ to discuss. The Falcons, they are the favorite to win the division. And DK, I will start with you. I'll give you the honors. What are the biggest questions that you have for Atlanta?
Well, Jacqueline, I wouldn't expect anything else being on the Mount Rushmore of Atlanta Falcons quarterbacks from my illustrious 2-year stint there in Atlanta, where I was unceremoniously dumped after those 2 years. But I think this is all about Kirk Cousins. I mean, you don't pay somebody $100 million guaranteed to come in there and just be okay. And I'll go in the words of Raheem Morris, who when he took the job, he said if the quarterback play had been better, there wouldn't have been a job opening because the previous regime would have still been there. This is a roster that is built to win, and it looks one player away from potentially making a deep playoff run. So is Kirk Cousins that piece? And that, to me, is the big question. And it leads to a lot of more questions because he's getting older. He's going to be 36. He's coming off an Achilles heel injury. And he's also a quarterback who's amassed an incredible amount of stats over his career, but he hasn't had much playoff success. So is Kirk Cousins the missing piece? Is this the final piece of the puzzle to help them get there? And for Kirk Cousins, is this the organization which finally gives him those pieces around him to make that potential deep playoff run?
Well, if Kirk Cousins is the guy that they expect him to be at quarterback, DK, wouldn't that put the Atlanta Falcons in the playoff and potentially have a playoff run, which would then leave them without the opportunity to draft a quarterback this high in their future without having some struggling seasons? And so I support the decision from the Atlanta Falcons from that standpoint. But my question for the Atlanta Falcons moving forward now that they have drafted Michael Penix Jr., DK, is how will the relationship fare between Kirk Cousins and Raheem Mostert moving forward this season? No matter what age you are or what stage you are in your career, no player likes another player to be drafted at their position, especially within the first 2 rounds. I went through that as a player. I was drafted in 2012, running back 4th round. The next season, the Seahawks drafted a running back in the 2nd round out of Texas A&M. An uncomfortable feeling. And credit to John Snyder, who was honest about the upcoming situation. Regardless of that, you still feel uncomfortable as a player. But it sounds like that same straightforwardness didn't happen for Kirk Cousins. And that can cause a little bit of a rift between your star player, all right, and your head coach and management, for that matter. So the biggest question mark for me going into this season for the Atlanta Falcons is, can that relationship between Kirk Cousins, head coach Raheem Mostert, and management be mended enough so they can go out there and handle business and have a successful season?
Yeah, Raheem saying Kirk does not have to look over his shoulder every time he throws a bad pass. It'll be interesting to see how that relationship fares moving forward. Perhaps the biggest threat to the Falcons in their division is the Bucs. We know Baker Mayfield is back. There is a new OC in town. Liam Cohen and Robert, your biggest question marks actually revolve around these two guys.
Absolutely. Anytime a quarterback loses their offensive coordinator, there's potential there for the quarterback to then struggle the next season. I think Jalen Hurts is a really good example of that. Had an extraordinary season in 2022, loses offensive coordinator Shane Steichen, who becomes the head coach for the Indianapolis Colts. And the Eagles offensively did not look the same at all. Another good example is Josh Allen. All right, his quarterback's coach, Ken Dorsey, becomes the offensive coordinator. You think everything is going to be swell. Well, Ken Dorsey didn't even last the entire season as the offensive coordinator for the Buffalo Bills. So when we look at this change, how critical is it going to be? How well is it going to work between Baker Mayfield and Liam Cohen. Dave Canales did an extraordinary job as an offensive coordinator. I was with Dave Canales all the way back when he was just a quality control coach in Seattle, deserving to be a head coach now. But will this relationship fare well between Baker Mayfield and Liam Cohen going into this 2024 season?
Robert, great minds think alike, because that was the exact same question I had, was how much is Baker Mayfield going to miss Dave Canales? You know, Liam Cohen comes in. There's always an interesting dynamic between the quarterback and the play caller. You have to be on the same page. You have to have a belief in each other. There's sort of a chemistry that develops over time, because even this past season, when Baker Mayfield got there, it wasn't smooth sailing early on. It was a little bit bumpy. And then remember, the back half of the season is where Baker Mayfield kind of felt comfortable, gets in there, and then has this incredible season, which leads to him, you know, inking this new 3-year, $100 million deal this offseason. So, and not only that, but Baker Mayfield, his whole entire career has been up and down. I mean, he had an incredible rookie season, then he was down, then he had an incredible third season, then he was down, then he was shown the door, and then he's been this journeyman quarterback, and now he's found new life with the Bucs. But a lot of this hinges on the relationship between the coach, the play caller, and the quarterback. So I want to see how that goes. How quickly does it take to find that synergy together, you know, on the sidelines and on the field? All of those questions, I think, are very valid for the Bucs.
And we just saw that graphic there, Geno and Baker coming off of career seasons when working with Dave Canales. We'll talk more about Canales and his Panthers in just a bit, but first let's talk about the Saints. And this was a team that was limited in the offseason because of the salary cap, and DK, that's why you have questions about this team.
Yeah, Jack, I mean, that's really what I want to know is have they done enough? I mean, they bring in Chase Young, which was a pretty cheap offseason acquisition to help on the defensive side of the ball, but they didn't really have a luxury of going out and making a big splashy offseason because of, you know, their salary cap issues. And Derek Carr is a quarterback who I think is only going to be as good as that supporting cast. And he was injured and banged up last year, and they were close. But if you remember, last year was supposed to be the year they were the favorites. Derek Carr's signing was supposed to be this big piece of the puzzle. Now, they do help the offensive line with Talius Fuaga along the offensive front. They bring in Kool-Aid McKinstry to help the defense. But to ask a young, you know, rookies to do much is asking a tremendous amount. So I look at this team. I think Dennis Allen has to take a big step forward. I think Derek Carr has to take a big step forward. And then if they don't, then what are you doing? You know, then what does it mean for Dennis Allen's future? What does it mean for Derek Carr's future? Because this division was one to be had, and it still is. We're talking about questions. This division probably has more questions than any other. So they're, once again, they should be competing for the division title. Have they done enough to take that step forward? Is it just returning experience that'll be that answer? We don't know yet.
Yeah, I have similar concerns for the New Orleans Saints this upcoming season, more so on the offensive side of the football as it pertains to their playmaking and their playmakers. You have Alvin Kamara, who's been doing it for a long time, but he even struggled at times last season. It's a good thing that you upgraded the offensive line because it felt like Derek Carr was running for his life half the game when he was playing on Sundays. But really the only outside threat that you have, all right, is Chris Olave. You didn't really do much to upgrade your playmaking ability at wide receiver. You lose Michael Thomas, not really a trustworthy player at this point of his career, dealing with the injuries and things of that nature. You draft Bud Means in the later rounds, but as a rookie, is he going to be able to come in and step in and be a playmaker right away? I'm not so sure. A lot of high-powered offenses around the league, and I'm not so sure New Orleans has done enough to keep up.
Gentlemen, you mentioned this is the division with perhaps the most questions out there, and maybe the team within the division with the most questions is the Panthers, coming off of a 2-win season. A lot of questions, a lot of issues, but Robert, what is the most glaring question mark that you have when it comes to this Carolina Panthers team?
It's the offensive line. It's clearly the offensive line. They did a great job adding some playmakers in the draft, in the offseason, free agency, things of that nature. Now, that they did go out and sign 2 guards this offseason who will potentially be starters, one from Seattle, one from the Packers. They drafted a tackle late in the draft. But these guys that they brought in as free agents, they're not necessarily Pro Bowlers or high-profile players. Bryce Young was a second most sacked quarterback in the league last season. So it's great that you went and got Xavier Legette in the draft and Jonathan Brooks at running back and, Jatavian Sanders to be a playmaker at tight end. But if Bryce Young is not going to be able to be protected, how good will those playmakers actually fare for this offense in 2024? So they didn't address the offensive line in a heavy manner in the draft to bring in some young guys to come in and compete. So I'm concerned about the protection of Bryce Young and this offensive line for the 2024 season.
I totally agree, Robert. I went a little bit bigger picture with the Panthers, and I want to know if the owner can get out of the way, because David Tepper has been an absolute disaster so far since buying the Carolina Panthers. He's run through coaches, including last year when he hires Frank Reich, which I think is a well-respected name across coaching circles.
Yeah.
Fires him before the year's open with the young quarterback in Bryce Young, who's trying to develop. Then this offseason, you've got issues. Last year during games, you're throwing drinks at fans. Like, what are we doing? This just before the draft, he goes into a sports bar and gets angry. That could have been a moment where he could have really endeared some fans to him by going in, making a joke of it, buy a round of drinks for everybody. Hey, we're all Panthers fans. Let's get this done. No, he's got to make a deal out. A video comes out. It's becoming an embarrassment to the NFL. Can he get out of the way and let Dave Canales do his job? Let the front office do their job, and just be somebody who's a little bit more hands-off. I know a lot of owners who are wealthy want to come in and put their fingerprints all over everything and micromanage. But to this point, David Tepper has been an absolute disaster as owner for the Carolina Panthers. He needs to get out of the way, or else this organization is going to be mired in the mud for quite some time.
Carolina, of course, the long shot to win the division at 14-1. Robert and DK joining us here on HQ to talk about the NFC South. We mentioned the Panthers and their odds, taking a look at the odds to win the NFC South. Saints plus 340, the Bucks at plus 290, and the Falcons, they are the heavy favorites at minus 120. Atlanta went 7-10 last year, missed the playoffs. We'll see if they can make the playoffs come this season.